Welcome to episode number 49 of the American Regularis Podcast. I am JD Walter, and I need you to do me a favor right now. Like and subscribe to whatever you're listening on. Tell your friends, share the news, and heck, let's just get right into it, guys. This episode, I think, is going to be a little more brief, but it's going to be a good one, and I think it's maybe a little more esoteric than general, because rather than focusing on the news, we're going to get into a couple things today, but rather than focusing on the news, I kind of want to focus on what's just the news is exposing as kind of an idea or a theme. We're going to talk about the newest incursion into Russia in the Ukraine war. Ukraine is once again trying to launch an offensive. Look, you'll know a tree by the fruit that it bears, and these are not going to be good fruits. It's going to fail, and it basically already has died out right away. And we're also going to talk about the Kennedy files, which were long awaited, and well, people are talking about them for reasons that are frustrating or reasons of new conspiracies. We'll talk about that a little bit. But the theme I want to go in on, I touched a little bit on the other week on how Russia seems to just focus more on substance and that our government is obsessed with optics. And both of these two subjects, Ukraine and the Kennedy files we're going to talk about today, I really think help to bring this thought further to light. And why is it? Why is it that our government is so obsessed with optics and propaganda that they would rather lie to us and themselves? You know, I don't trust the Russian government, or I don't trust any government, but I might almost venture to say that the Russian government is more honest than the U.S. government, if only because I don't believe the Russian government lies to itself as much as our American government lies to itself. Right? Maybe it's even. Maybe Russia's worse when it comes to lying to their people. I'm sure they're terrible. They're a government. But I think they're more honest with themselves than the U.S. government is. So why is it? I was trying to ask myself, why is our government so obsessed with optics? And they want to live in a constructed reality of the way they try to make us perceive things, more so than they actually want to deal in the concrete facts and what it is, right? And I think the reason they like to do this is somewhat the fault of the people. Now, whether that's an American fault or just a fault common with all of those, I don't know. I'm still working this out a little bit. It's a little more esoteric than I generally get into. But people want an excuse to believe what they want. Right? That makes sense with libertarians, conservatives, liberals, anybody. If somebody really wants something, they really want Bigfoot to be real, right? Or it's your brother explaining to you how it's possible for, you know, your guys' team to come back with 3 minutes left in the fourth quarter and what we need to do to close out this third and short and get a turnover for a field goal and then onside kick for, you know. If you give somebody just enough wiggle room for plausibility, they want that. And it's Lloyd Christmas on Dumb and Dumber, right? I'd say more like 1 in a million. So you're telling me there's a chance. It's a great line. People like it. People meme it. But there's a truth to that. If you really want something, all you need is a little bit. And you can see this with conspiracy theories, whether it's Tartaria or whether it's, all the European monarchs that were supposedly black because 400 years ago they might have had a Moorish ancestor or something like this. You can see it in these conspiracy theories. You can see it with Bigfoot. You can see it with aliens. You can see it all the time. If you just present if you can just crack that door open enough for someone to get their big toe inside of it, they'll hold it open. And they'll say, like, this is it. This is true. They just need a little bit of breathing room for their theory to be true. Now, it doesn't have to be as crazy as the Anunnaki. It doesn't have to be so crazy that it was like, all of European monarchs were actually sub-Saharan African descent. It doesn't have to be that way. It can be more plausible. You just have to give them that opening. And I see this a lot with the Ukraine war because as I've covered it and as I've read about it and studied about it and listened to guys like Daniel Davis and Scott Horton and John Mearsheimer and countless others, the evidence against any feasible way for the Ukrainians to win this war is just overwhelming. And if you want to live in a world based on realism and truth and just the cold hard facts, it's very easy to see this. And I'm not pretending right now that I have some sort of direct path to the truth and I know more than everyone else, or that none of my theories aren't like this. I certainly, I'm sure, have my prejudices. I think this is a natural human instinct. If you want something, I think you will look for a glimmer or a chance of it being real, and then you'll find a little bit of water and you'll try to, grow that, whatever it is you're growing, that seed of hope. Ukraine, they've done this routinely, where the Kursk offensive is this big, bold thing, or there's the ghost of Kiev, or one of the most propagated pieces of propaganda is that the Russians, the death tolls that the Ukraine and Western side have made up for the Russians is just preposterous when you look at it through a realistic prism. If you look through the amount of artillery and troops on the line, there's just no way that the Ukrainians are getting this 11-to-1 ratio when they've got of killed Russians versus dead Ukrainians, when the Russians outnumber in artillery 9-to-1 or 10-to-1, and most of the deaths are a result of artillery. Like, it just isn't possible. And so they go, how do we square this? Okay, we'll just tell them that the Russians are doing mass wave attacks. They're just Zerg rushing. They're just blindly throwing their guys in. They did it in World War II in Stalingrad or Leningrad or whatnot. Stalingrad. So we'll just say they're doing it now. People will believe that. There's historical precedent for it. And these guys are just blindly throwing troops and it's a slaughter. Russians are dying for sure. But they're not wantonly throwing their men away like that. There's no benefit for them to do it. But it gives people a seed of, that's how it's possible that the Ukrainians really are killing that many Russians. That's how it's possible that Ukraine's going to be able to keep its people keep its territory because they've got Kursk, which rapidly, they have basically nothing left of Kursk, and it's likely that the people that were involved in that offensive are going to be surrounded before too long. It's dead on arrival, and it happened at a bad time for these ceasefires. You just need to keep these optics up, and people will believe it as long as you want. This week, there's a new Ukrainian offensive, and when these offensives happen, the goal is that they're going to push it in, and then Russia will be forced to relocate troops from the front line, and they'll have to redirect them to fight off the new offensive into their own territory. That's not what happens. Russia has so many people, they just move them in from Russia, from other places in Russia, not the front line. They just bring more people into it. Meanwhile, Ukraine is already short on men and equipment, and they throw it to new areas of battle. That just means Russians bringing more people into the fight while you're redistributing your men and resources to that front. And then it ends poorly. Now that makes no sense unless you're obsessed with these optics. And Ukraine, I say it every time, they've done such a good job, really, for a country that small. They've been given a ton of equipment and finances. But Russia doesn't even have all 4 provinces controlled yet that they claim. Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia. But at the same time, you hear the Europeans. What's the optic? What's the thing? Putin wants to take over all of Europe. Now, that's preposterous. They say it. They say he's going to go for the Baltics and Poland, and he won't stop. He's a tyrant and a madman, and he's delusional. That's optics, because as much as they throw out the optics that Ukraine's going to win, which isn't true, they also know that it's impossible for Ukraine to win. And so what do? You change the vision of what the war is over. So instead of Russia taking 4 oblasts in the east of Ukraine, and potentially they'll take more if these terms can't be met and agreed upon, instead of them retaining the Crimea and getting 4 new oblasts in the east of Ukraine, you tell everyone that he's trying to conquer Europe. So when he takes his 4 oblasts and he keeps the Crimea, and perhaps he takes as far in as Odessa, and then you say, well, look, we won because we stopped him from invading all of Europe, and Ukraine gets to keep a little of its sovereignty, even if it's a shell of itself now. It's all about the optics, and even if they're not credible, even if all of those things I said are ridiculous, Ukraine can't win the war and Putin doesn't want Europe. But people will believe it because they want to. These ceasefire talks, Trump wants them to be seeming like a great idea, and then if the Russians say no, well, now it's just Putin is uncompromising. Which in truth, it would be the most overly compromising thing ever. There's no compromise in it. The only thing that's Putin put in for a ceasefire when he was giving these terms, he talked about, hey, let's end long-range strikes on infrastructure. Let's just keep the focus on people. Now, why is that? Because Putin and the Russians have basically obliterated all Ukrainian infrastructure these past 3 years. Whereas the Ukrainians are starting to damage infrastructure inside Russia. It's simply too big, and their drones are able to get in there and cause damage. They just, I don't know if this would be considered infrastructure, but they just had a successful attack on Engels Air Force Base, or whatever the airfield, maybe Air Force Base, the Engels airfield in the Saratov province. So this would benefit Putin, which makes sense. You're going to try to get terms that benefit you. That's what these ceasefires are. They'll never agree to those because the West is asking for too much, and what the East is asking for is like basically the only thing that would help them and not the Ukrainians. So these ceasefires talks are dead on arrival. They're not going to work. But they're being pushed anyways to give people a glimpse of hope and optics. Now, this helps to tie in how I feel about this focus of the West in particular being obsessed with optics and how things look and not dealing in reality. And I think the Kennedy release, the files that were released on the JFK assassination, I think this is linked to this general dishonest worldview of the government and the people's willingness to do that. Now, you can say this either way. Before these Kennedy files were released, which I think they were widely disappointing, if everything that was released pointed to the fact that it was Lee Harvey Oswald alone by himself, case closed, government had nothing to do with it, they were the good guys, there would be a ton of people, admittedly, including myself, that would not believe it. Now, conversely, as long as there aren't 4 notarized documents signed by LBJ and everyone else that says, yes, we explicitly had a deep state coup that killed John F. Kennedy, there will be enough grain of doubt, even if there's a smoking gun in those files, which there isn't, and there won't be, and there never will be. There would still be those who wouldn't want to have to wrestle with the fact that the government killed its president. They went after us with the fact, what does that mean? Where should we go from here? What type of reform should be needed? Are we being protected or not? And so as long as you don't directly come out and say it, they can comfort themselves and say, no, that's just not how it is. Maybe it was a long time ago. That's not how it is now. People believe what they want to believe. This is why we see the government take forever to actually admit something. Case in point, these Kennedy files, it was almost 62 years ago. They still have redacted different parts of the files. They've still talked about saying we need to review it for national security. There's still 20,000 some files that haven't been released 62 years after the fact because they realize what the optics do. And that as long as they're sitting back there, they can be nothing. And by the way, the files, there will never be a file. If you're going to have a coup and you're going to murder a U.S. president and you're some CIA agent, you guys aren't going to have a file that, you Xerox and copy and duplicate and triplicate with a carbon copy. You're not going to put that in the office. I'm pretty sure that part might not have a signature and a notary or whatever. So you're never going to find that smoking gun. This is one of the most frustrating things. And look, Pam Bondi, people are rightfully upset with her. She's going to release the Epstein files. Then it's redacted and it's missing half of them. Then she does the Kennedy files and it's redacted and it's missing a third of them. The optics, this is Trump keeping promises. That's their optics. When in reality, he's not keeping promises, because if you redact it and if you keep stuff back in national security interests, you're not keeping your promise. But they can say they did. Oh, check it off the box. That's what they say. Oh, another check off the box. We did that. We're keeping promises. And they're not. Everybody gets to be happy in their own little delusion. It's like the Matrix, right? We use the red pill example all the time, but the guy named Cyrus, right? He's eating the steak and he says he knows the steak's not real, but he'd be happier if he didn't know that the steak wasn't real. Ignorance is bliss, is what he says. He takes a bite of the steak. That's what he wants. He doesn't want to know the truth. He wants to be happy, right? That's like the big paradoxical viewpoint from Neo, who takes the red pill and wants to know the truth. That's more people than we think. And it can be on who started a war, how the war's going, who killed who, what governments were involved with Kennedy or Epstein. And that's why it's kind of, I said earlier, you can know a tree by the fruit it bears. The government will not produce good fruit. It just doesn't. It doesn't, and it never gives you the truth. And so you should know that the government is intrinsically dishonest. And instead, we have this human instinct where so many of us will take it. As long as the government doesn't tell us, we can ascribe or speculate on better intentions. That's the whole national interest thing, and that people are outraged on, and rightfully so. What national security interests do files from 62 years ago about a dead president? What is the national security risks that might pose? There are none. But that's the optics they give you. National security risk, not we could get in trouble or look bad risk. They don't say that. Similarly, and people, this is even more egregious, is, hey, we're going to redact some of the Epstein files for national security risks. Why should our government have anything at risk from exposing a sex predator? Why? Why would that do anything? We know why, and we know that when they say it's a national security risk, it's not about national security. It's about keeping up the illusion. And they'll do that forever. Nothing we can do will make them reveal it. Even if you get in some renegade maverick like you think Donald Trump is, they're still hiding it. They're still saying stuff is national security risk. We can't release it. It is the government's nature. I can't remember the guy's name, but it's always a famous quote that warfare is the health of the state. I would go to argue that the mental health of the state is optics and propaganda. As soon as a government is honest with you, it would inevitably lead to its downfall, because any government that's honest with you is going to show its corruption by nature of its honesty, right? If it could become honest, it would have to expose its own corruption, its own lies, its own failings, its own mistakes, its own ambitions, and its own interests that are opposed to its citizens. And all of those things are so much more than we recognize, because they won't tell us and we can't know. All right. We got into the weeds a little more. It's a shorter episode, but that is just an itch I needed to scratch, and kind of looking at why it is that our government, especially in modern times, is so obsessed with optics over reality. And that's the best I can come up with. Look, a lot of this is me thinking off the top of my head. Please correct me where I'm wrong. I would love to hear it. I don't think I'm a genius or a philosopher king, so please expose me for where I got it wrong. Let me know. You can email me at americanregularispodcast@gmail.com. You can message me on Twitter at reg_American1, or just write down in the comments. So thank you for listening. Take care.